Coming up on The World Today. Russia begins evacuation from Kherson in south ahead of Ukrainian offensive. British Foreign Minister James Cleverly condemns treatment of protesters at Chinese consulate. And U.S. South Korean troops stage river-crossing drills. North Korean military orders more artillery firing in response to South Korean action. A warm welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. Russia has launched new strikes against military and energy targets in Ukraine. This is according to the Russian Defense Ministry. It added that all designated targets were hit. Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov also said that 2 companies of Ukrainian army tried to capture the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after crossing Kakhovka, the water reservoir there. According to him, Russian troops defending the plant destroyed the enemy landing forces. Meanwhile, Russian-installed authorities in the occupied Ukrainian region of Kherson have said that they plan to evacuate around 50,000 to 60,000 people over the next 6 days amid escalating pressure from a Ukrainian counteroffensive. Kherson residents, some of whom took pets with them, were seen today waiting to board boats to get to the other bank of the Dnipro River that bisects Ukraine. Yevgeny Melnikov, a leader at the Kherson wing of the All-Russian People's Front, said the boats would take people to Oleshki and Hola Pristan, from where residents could board buses to travel further to Crimea, Krasnodar, or somewhere further. The Russian-installed governor of Kherson region, Vladimir Saldo, said the authorities there were moving civilians to the east bank of the Dnipro in order to keep people safe and allow the military to act resolutely. He said an estimated 10,000 people a day would be moved over the next 6 days and that some regions in Russia were being prepared to accept people. Kherson residents have received text messages warning them of the urgent need to evacuate. Russian state television reported more than 5,000 have left in the last 2 days. Russia took control of most of Ukraine's southern Kherson region shortly after it started what it casts as its special military operation in February and proclaimed it as annexed in September, a move that Kyiv and the West has denounced as illegal. In the meantime, Russian President Vladimir Putin says he is introducing martial law in 4 Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine that Moscow last month claimed as its own territory. In televised remarks to members of his Security Council, Mr. Putin also instructed the government to set up a special coordinating council under Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin to work with Russia's regions to boost Moscow's war effort in Ukraine. The moves nearly 8 months into the war mark the latest escalation by Putin to counter a series of major defeats at the hands of Ukrainian forces since the start of September. They came on the same day that Russian-installed officials in Kherson, one of the 4 occupied regions, told civilians to leave some of the areas. Mr. Putin said the measures he was ordering would increase the stability of the economy, the industry and production in support of what Russia calls its special military operation. Meanwhile, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has said that he has agreed with his Russian counterpart to form a natural gas hub in Turkey. Speaking to members of his party in parliament, Erdogan said Putin had said that Europe can obtain its gas supply from the hub in Turkey. Mr. Putin last week proposed that Turkey as a base for gas supplies after the Nord Stream pipelines under the Baltic Sea were damaged last month by blasts. The European Union, which previously turned to Russia for about 40% of its gas needs is, however, seeking to wean itself off Russian energy following its invasion of Ukraine in February. Major EU importers such as Germany and Italy have found alternative sources, built up gas stocks ahead of winter that is likely to be tough because of sky-high energy prices and the fear of rationing and also power cuts. Well, both Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 connecting Russia and Germany were damaged last month, spewing out a large amount of gas. International Atomic Energy Agency's chief, Rafael Grossi, expects to return soon to Ukraine amid negotiations to establish a security protection zone around the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Mr. Grossi has been the go-between from Moscow to Kyiv in an effort to establish a nuclear safety and security protection zone around the plant, which has been hit by power outages in the past weeks due to shelling on the site. Earlier yesterday, the IAEA said it was deeply concerned by the detention of 2 Ukrainian staff from the Zaporizhzhia plant, which is one of the 4 Ukrainian regions Russia has proclaimed as annexed. The talks are seen as key to diffusing concerns that have mounted since August about the risks of shelling at or near Zaporizhzhia, Europe's largest nuclear power station.
There is a possibility I will return to Ukraine and Russia. This is in fact what we have agreed in principle. At the moment, we are counting the consultations aimed at establishing the protection zone. This implies an interaction where I receive answers and reactions from the two sides, and I am looking for new ways to move forward. And for that, at some point, probably very soon, I will have to return.
Utilice armas nucleares no es una posibilidad inmediata.
Well, when Baltic states switched off Russian power and halted other imports in response to Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, Estonia restarted its shale oil power plants and set back its efforts to phase out heavily polluting fuels. It mirrors actions across the European Union as governments wean themselves of Russian gas, which once supplied the bloc. Now they're racing to find other gas suppliers or alternate fuels as a stopgap for winter. Now, he said Finland and the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia lost Russian power imports of about 2.5 gigawatt hours, which needed to be replaced to keep the lights on.
It is insurance tickets for Estonia because oil shale is there. We have it still around 1 billion tons in Estonia to use. How we use it, this of course depends on the situation on the markets, but we would like to use it on a much economically reasonable way, and also with a much less of the environmental footprint. We have been starting up the old power plants which were idle for the last 2 years already as a reserve, and we have been running those since this time, soon 1 year. And this is just to replace the missing power supplies, compensate high power prices in the area. And yeah, this has been causing us much bigger use of oil shale and also job for the much more people.
And European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has condemned Russia's missile and drone attacks on power stations and other infrastructure in Ukraine, calling them acts of pure terror that amount to war crimes. Speaking ahead of an EU summit to be held in Brussels on Thursday and Friday, she also said the EU needed to tackle citizens' concerns about their energy bills. According to her, a scheme used in Spain and Portugal to cap the price of gas used to generate electricity is worth considering for implementation across the European Union. Well, on the energy front, Croatia and Lithuania want a wholesale gas cap. Germany prefers other solutions, while Finland and Slovakia disagree on direct subsidies. As the European Union grapples with the energy crunch, Germany, the bloc's biggest economy and the main opponent of capping gas prices, said joint purchases, reducing consumption and boosting supplies were the way to go instead. But with these energy crises dominating the agenda, joining us to talk more about this is energy analyst Temitope Anderson. He joins me now virtually. Thank you and welcome to the program.
Hi, Millicent. Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. Let's begin from what we've been witnessing. It happened yesterday, days before, the destruction of critical infrastructure in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Russia has destroyed almost a third of Ukraine's power stations over the past week alone. What kind of challenges do you see resulting from this?
Thanks again, Millicent, for having me. Well, if President Zelensky's reaction to that attack is anything to go by, when he says that no space for left for negotiations with Putin's regime, it then means that the end to the crisis is really bleak, at least in the immediate, and that's not good for the entire world at the moment. It appears that the tension is not getting any better. It's not getting resolved anytime soon, and it means that going forward we'll continue to have issues with the energy crisis that what the European countries are having, as well as even the rest of us, especially in Nigerian situation where we only produce and we don't refine, and at the best we're not getting any advantage from whatever increase in the price, especially again, as we've seen in recent times, that there has been not so much as to meeting the quota that we're meant to meet. So it's not anything good for the world, in my view. I think that it basically says that there is no clear end in sight to the crisis that we're experiencing, or that Ukraine is currently experiencing.
It is said that, Africa should be benefiting, in this way from what appears to be happening with Europe, having a sort of alternate place to get, some of this energy deals and whatnot. But then, we have the EU, who will be meeting tomorrow and the day after to really sit down and talk about this. But it appears there is division within that continent as well. Some are not comfortable. Hungary is one of them. To leave yet or put a price cap in terms of what we are seeing. For example, the Commission is saying that they're going to propose yet another set of emergency measures to tackle the high energy prices, but then cap on gas prices, they haven't decided. It seems to have split the bloc, as they're saying it's very difficult to agree on a design.
Yeah, apparently because the member countries in the EU have varying economic situations in themselves, right? And the price cap is expectedly putting some sort of subsidy regime for each of the countries. And what it could lead to is that you then begin to see some countries are able to maybe purchase more gas than others because they have a better condition. Right, and what that could result to is that it creates some sort of inequality, which is why at the last meeting they weren't talking about it. They were rather talking about something that is more like a maximum dynamic price, where it's just a particular range we're then looking at, aside from putting a specific price to it, right? There is never a perfect fix for this sort of situation. I think at the best, what the EU countries will be able to get at this point would be to get some sort of compromise amongst the various countries that are involved. And with that, it's expected that countries will then be required to jointly purchase about 15% of the volume that they require to hit the EU's target to fill their storage by, say, to 90% by, say, November 2023, because It's for them a question of just trying to get as much gas in store in the near term, right? And then look at a situation where they could then begin to diversify and look at other alternatives in the long run. But I mean, indeed, we don't envy the situation they are in. It's difficult because, like I mentioned earlier, each of the EU countries
Oh dear, we seem to be having some audio issues. Temitope, can you still hear me?
Yeah, very well. I was
right.
saying that each of the EU countries definitely have varying economic situations in their countries, and that has impacted having a sort of consensus on the issue of the price cap. So hopefully the maximum dynamic price would help resolve that.
So when we look at what's happening, and this is with the Nord Streams, the investigation continues. Russia has been blaming and is still blaming the West of being behind the sabotage and says that the investigations are being conducted in secret. I mean, how does this play out, seeing as a lot of these countries are still relying on Russia? Russia says the sabotage essentially shows that it is not in Russia's interest, so how could they have done that? What do you make of that back and forth going with what, Europe is witnessing now?
Well, usually we know that people are not allowed to be judges in their own matters, right? And if there is any big corporate in all of these, it's clearly Russia, and of course, maybe you want to join Ukraine to that, right? So, I mean, I'm not even very interested in the blame games, particularly because the blame games will not do anything for any of the parties and for the rest of the world in terms of resolving the issues in the long term. The damage to the pipelines is definitely a major flashpoint, and it has critical implications for climate concerns, right? So, again, I think at the best, it's for the parties to shed their sword and then look at how to shift grounds and negotiate for peace rather than toss the issues here and there as to who attacked the pipelines and who didn't, right? And look for how to deal with the issues head on, right? I think that's really the way to go rather than try to trade blames here.
I'm sure that, its citizens, talking about the whole of Europe, need fast, effective solutions to subsidize prices for citizens and also companies. How easy will that be, seeing as winter is approaching?
It's not definitely an easy talk. Hopefully the conversations that should happen before the end of this week around the dynamic price, maximum price should help get that to some sort of, reasonable point, right? The EU already has agreed targets to fill gas storage and curb electricity demand. So they're trying to also manage how people use energy and all of that. So I think the citizens also have to be responsible at this time and understand that this is a situation that it's out of the ordinary, right? They will not expectedly want to have all the comforts that they've always had over time and adjust their lifestyle, definitely. It's a difficult demand, but it's something that they definitely have to do at this time, right? And not just look at their purse and look at how affordable gas is for them, depending on their individual economic situation or family situations, right? If they look at it from a nationalistic or a world view, I think they will be able to see to what the issue is and then see how there is a more unified approach to solving the problem, while the countries and the EU in itself is trying to find a balanced price that works for the nations that are concerned. So the citizens will definitely should be at the priority of the considerations for each of the countries. And it's not going to be an easy conversation, but it's something that I trust that the president of the EU and every other member nation will sit down and have something to come up with, some sort of subsidy system. We saw what happened in the UK, for instance, that people also pushed back as to how you're going to fund the subsidy, right? So indeed, again, no matter what subsidy, whichever country or whichever commission agrees to do, it's about how to fund it in the long run. So in all of that, I'm saying it's not going to be an easy conversation, but it's something that expectedly, with the management of the demand for energy in itself, there would be some reasonable achievements in the right direction.
Hopefully, and talking about those meetings, one person who will be looking forward to their decision is also the Russian president. Well, I'd like to thank you, Temitope Kolodi Anderson, energy expert. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you very much, Millicent, for having me. Have a great evening.
You as well. Well, nestled by the mouth of the southern Bur River, within earshot of fighting between Russia and Ukraine forces for the southern city of Kherson, the village of Liman counts itself as one of Ukraine's more fortunate places. The hamlet of modest brick homes, gardens with olive, orange, pomegranate trees has electricity. It's not always on, but when it is, it means clean water for drinking, bathing, cooking, cell phone service and television. Liman has not been spared the fighting that has convulsed countless other Ukrainian villages, towns and cities. It sits close to the Russian lines that the Ukrainian troops drove back beginning in August in a counteroffensive for Kherson, located about 30 kilometers away. But their power supply means that residents who had earlier fled the village are returning. Their good fortune contrasts with swaths of Ukraine in which tens of thousands have lost light, heat and water as Russia intensifies its missile attacks. Still ahead on the program. New York City presents new shelter complex for arriving migrants. We have details in a moment. Welcome back. British Prime Minister Liz Truss says she is committed to increasing state pensions in line with the level of inflation and defied calls from opposition lawmakers to resign, saying she is a fighter. Ms. Truss has been forced to hunt for deep spending cuts after the Prime Minister's now scrapped economic programme shattered investor confidence in Britain's government and sent borrowing costs surging.
Well, Mr. Speaker, our policy is...
But now she's here, can she tell us, given the absolute chaos her government has created, why the Chancellor lost his job but she kept hers?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I have been very clear that I am sorry and that I have made mistakes. But the right thing to do in those circumstances is to make changes, which I've made, and to get on with the job and deliver for the British people. And Mr. Speaker, we've delivered the energy price guarantee, we've helped people this winter, and I will continue to do that.
However, some Londoners are calling on Prime Minister Liz Truss to resign as she desperately tried to reassert authority over the fraught ranks of her Conservative Party amid growing reports that momentum was building to oust her. Ms. Truss is trying to shore up support from within the party after she was forced to scrap the vast tax-cutting plan, leading some Conservative lawmakers to call for her to be replaced as leader just weeks after she took office.
Well, she's made an awful lot of mistakes. She was incredibly naive to think you could give all that energy support and still cut taxes. It was stupid. Never thought about you have to balance the books. She never gave a thought for mortgage interest rates. and the effect on the pound. I mean, there are millions of people who are going to be facing cliff edges of mortgage increases.
I think she should resign, but people, from my point of view, there's a feeling that perhaps it's better if she doesn't resign, because more chaos will ensue, because she hasn't got a clue how to do the job, basically. And therefore we would move quicker to a general election, which is what most of the population, judging by the polls in the last couple of weeks, want.
You can't blame one person. I mean, there's so many factors involved, but obviously the mismanagement of the economy the last month has contributed to a general feeling of insecurity and unease. And the only thing the Conservatives really can do is call an election at this point. But they won't, because they're going to lose their seats, the members. So they won't do it, unfortunately, and there's no way to force them.
I do actually think she should resign. I don't think she should have got in the first place. I think she's making a right mess of it, to be fair. I worry for him, to be honest. It's the world she's creating, and everybody is creating. It's just one mess after another, and she's having to U-turn on everything, and it's just hysterical. I have to watch the news and just laugh, because I can't believe what she's doing.
Well, away from Liz Truss, but still staying in Britain, British Foreign Minister James Cleverly indeed has condemned the act of mistreatment on protesters. He says the treatment of a protester being seen pulled into the grounds of a Chinese consulate and beaten was unacceptable, and the government was considering further action. A man who was protesting outside a Chinese consulate in Britain said he was dragged inside the grounds by a masked man, kicked and punched in an attack. China has disputed the account of events which took place during the demonstration on Sunday, which was against Chinese President Xi Jinping outside the consulate in Manchester.
Well, I summoned the Chinese chargé d'affaires to the Foreign Office to make it absolutely clear that the UK government's view is that the events that happened at the consulate in Manchester were unacceptable. Greater Manchester Police are conducting an investigation. I will need to see the details of that investigation before we decide what other action that we might take. But we have made it absolutely clear to the Chinese embassy that this behaviour is unacceptable. The Prime Minister's made it clear that we made mistakes with regard to certain elements of the mini budget, of that financial statement.
Hear from China's foreign ministry responding to questions about the clashes between Hong Kong protesters and the staff of its consulate in the British city of Manchester. We'll bring you that track much later. But let's go over to the United States, where a record number of voters turned out in the U.S. state of Georgia on the first day of early voting, with the state the site of several key races in the November midterm elections. Almost double the number of people, 131,000, cast their ballots than in the same period of the 2018 midterms. The figure nearly matches the number of voters on the first early voting day of the 2020 presidential election. Georgia is home to some of the country's most closely watched races. The midterm elections on the 8th of November will determine seats in the two chambers of Congress, 1/3 of those in the Senate and all in the House of Representatives, as well as some governors and local officials. Our correspondent from Washington, Maria Bird, joins me now for more. Hi, Maria. How did Georgia record those large numbers on the first day of voting?
Well, Georgia is one of those that has had an extremely heated midterm election kind of preseason. And so we all know that there has been much challenge around whether or not Kemp, the current governor, will be staying in office, or whether or not we will be having Stacey Abrams to move into that seat. And so that has been a heated election quite some time now. We know that Stacey Abrams did not win the seat in previous elections, and so this is going to be one that the whole country will be watching.
Remind us again about the significance of the midterm elections, how this will impact President Joe Biden's presidency.
This is going to tremendously impact his presidency, because if we find that the House is able to have a majority Republican majority in the House, then we will see a lot of stalemate. If we also find that the Senate becomes majority Republican, you'll see even further stalemate between the executive branch of government and the actual in the Senate and the House. And so this will put forth a lot of challenge, as the president might want to move forward with certain policies, certain programs. We know right now we're dealing with some economic crises in the U.S. Inflation is extremely high. So those will all be challenges for him if he does not ensure and if the midterm elections do not prove to have Democrats in a majority.
I know that some polls have come out. What are they suggesting as to what party controls what?
Well, it looks as if right now the Democrats are doing a little bit better than they were. What we're seeing, especially as you look at some of the areas on the East, you're seeing that Democrats are doing far better. A lot of that is due to, depending on where the Republican sits. Are they what considered a traditionalist Republican? Are they a MAGA Republican? In the state of Maryland, for example, you have someone that is running for governor that has a strong support of former President Trump. And so it really depends on where the Republican Party sits as they support some of these candidates. But you have areas like Georgia, as we stated before, that has a very strong Republican base, and also a governor that is looking for re-election, and one that many Republicans have voted for in the past.
And this will be the first nationwide vote since Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol January 6th, nearly 2 years ago. Are Americans on the edge, do you think?
Americans are very nervous. I think this will be one that will finally be historic. I think that what we'll see is long lines at polls. We'll see unprecedented number of absentee ballots and early voting, as you mentioned earlier. We will really begin to see that the numbers will probably very much be similar to what we see for presidential election cycles, just because I think people know what's at stake. And there has been, ever since President Biden has been in office, there has been a lot of efforts and discussions around the midterm elections. And as you mentioned, with the attack on democracy in the U.S. with the January 6th attacks, many Americans are beginning to be very focused on politics, but most importantly, the governing of the United States.
And Maria, before we let you go, Trump supporters say they see a storm coming. What do you see?
Well, you know, that's what I think some of the conversations are within the former president's immediate, those who are strong supporters of his. But I don't think that we're going to see the type of uprising that many might expect, due to the fact that I think many Americans are looking for some stability. They're looking for some answer to be able to solve how do we move from in a post-COVID era. The U.S. is really moving back to what some might consider business as usual. And so it's really time that many of the issues that have been long-standing around the economy, around employment, around education, are all being addressed. And I think that's what Americans are more focused on, having stable government structures that will allow for forward movement.
Maria, many thanks. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Maria Bird live for us there. Let's move on to other stories now, where South Korean and U.S. troops practice building floating bridges to ferry tanks and other armored vehicles across rivers today as part of larger joint drills that have drawn the ire of North Korea. South Korean attack helicopters deployed flares overhead and armored vehicles blew white smoke screens into the air as main battle tanks, armored personnel carriers, other military vehicles crossed pontoon bridges assembled over the Namhan River near Yuju, south of Seoul. The drill involved armored attacking forces of the South Korean Army's 11th Mobile Division, which is participating in the 12-day Poguk 22 field exercises, crossing pontoon bridges established by South Korean and U.S. engineering units. North Korea has condemned the ongoing drills.
So we've been doing a combined wet gap crossing operation where the U.S. and ROC will work together to raft vehicles and then build a full enclosure bridge across any wet gap, most likely a bridge or a river with bridges going out.
Well, now, North Korea's military said it has ordered its troops to fire more artillery shells off its east and west coast in response to South Korea's firing of rounds from multiple rocket launchers. This, according to the North's officials news agency. The North fired the latest shots around 12:30 p.m. The South's Joint Chiefs of Staff said in a statement urging Pyongyang to halt acts threatening peace and security in the region. North Korea's Korean People's Army said the latest move was in response to South Korea's firing of over 10 shells of multiple rocket launchers near the front line between 8:25 a.m. and 9:40 a.m. local time. Today's exchange of firings comes shortly after the North fired some 100 shells into the sea off its west coast and shot a further 150 rounds off its east coast yesterday night. To all the stories, migrants and asylum seekers can now arrive in New York City as a short-term solution to accommodation. The new shelter complex for arriving migrants is a one-stop and temporary facility that helps people figure out what their next destination is going to be.
New York City presents a new housing complex on an island next to Manhattan that is ready to house as much as 1,000 new migrant arrivals at a time. The Humanitarian Emergency Response and Relief Center on New York City's Randall's Island will open for male migrants.
Not for a long time, New York City has had the need to open a welcome center big enough to have the capacity to welcome these many newly arrived immigrants, asylum seekers. We want to make sure that we're able to meet all their immediate needs, which, as you saw, include medical attention, include rest, an area to rest, to take a shower, and most importantly, a way to connect to their loved ones and friends and to people who might be able to help them to get to their final destination. We in New York City want to be as helpful as possible to asylum seekers to get to wherever they need to get to. Unfortunately, for many, New York City is not the place, so this will give us the capacity to be able to do that.
Nearly 20,000 migrants have come to New York since April. An average of 5 or 6 buses have arrived each day since early September.
We have set up the facility to be able to scale up very quickly to 1,000 people. We are currently operating with the rest of the infrastructure we need in place, all the variable costs, to be able to provide these services for 500. And so that's where we are right now. So this is a 500-bed humanitarian emergency HERC. But if we need to expand it to 1,000, we can do that. But there's additional staff, other things that need to be able to brought in to be able to accomplish that.
New York City Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, Ann Williams Isom, is proud of the relief center.
I feel proud as a New Yorker, knowing what we are doing, what we are trying to construct for people that we care about, in the same way that we wanted that to happen for our family members and for those who are New Yorkers today.
In addition to beds and a dining area, the complex provides phones, laundry machines, and recreation spaces, including a television and couch and board games like chess, checkers, and Scrabble.
My mom is turning 90.
Coming up next. Cuba's foreign ministry thanks the United States for $2 million offered for Hurricane Ian relief. Details shortly. Welcome back. At least 8 people have been reported killed and 15 others injured following 2 explosions inside Myanmar's high-security prison. According to media reports, 2 parcel bombs had detonated this morning, killing 3 prison staff and 5 visitors, injuring at least another 10 people as explosions ripped through the prison's mailroom. Local media also reports that one of the bombs exploded in a building where staff received care packages for prisoners, and another detonated outside the building. It added that several shots were fired by the prison's military personnel after the blast and that some of the people wounded had sustained gunshot wounds. However, no group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. As a result of blasts caused by an improvised explosive device, a 4th United Nations peacekeeper has died in Mali. The United Nations patrol was seen checking for landmines in Tessalit, northern Mali, when the blast took place Monday. According to officials, all of those who died were from Chad. About 180 peacekeepers have been killed during the decade-long UN mission in Mali. It began in response to a jihadist insurgency, but the violence has persisted and spread. However, the head of mission told a meeting of the UN Security Council in New York that more help was desperately needed. Well, that meeting took place where the head of Mali's mission told the council in New York that indeed help was severely needed. The special representative of the Secretary General in Mali briefed the council on what it terms encouraging developments in the country, but warned that they are unfolding against the backdrop of a very challenging security, humanitarian and human rights situation.
Some sources suggest that as many as 23 children have been killed and many others injured in at least 7 provinces by live ammunition, metal pellets at close range, and fatal beatings. A number of schools have also been raided and children arrested by security forces. Some principals have also been reportedly arrested for not cooperating with security forces. On the 11th of October, the Minister of Education confirmed that an unspecified number of children had been sent to psychological centers after they were arrested, allegedly for participating in anti-state protests. Under the human rights treaties accepted by Iran, the Islamic Republic has an obligation to protect children's right to life under any circumstances and to respect and protect their rights to freedom of expression and peaceful protest. A large number of these human rights defenders, journalists, students, lawyers, opposition politicians, and environmentalists are among those held at Evin prison in Tehran, where a fire broke out on the 15th of October. Details of the incident remain unclear, but there were also reports of explosions and gunfire, and officials say that at least 8 prisoners died and 61 were injured. The continued, unnecessary, and disproportionate use of force against protesters must stop.
We go over to health now, where close to 100 children in Indonesia have died from acute kidney injury, or AKI, so far this year. According to a health ministry official, a team of experts are investigating the spike in cases. As of October 18, Indonesian authorities identified 206 cases of AKI among children, with 99 fatalities. The health ministry spokesperson Mohammed Sahil said this today. He told a news conference that 65% of the cases had been treated in Jakarta as a preventive measure. The ministry has also asked all health workers in health facilities to temporarily stop prescribing or providing any liquid or syrup medication until their research and investigation is completed. The rise in fatalities comes as Gambia's government probes the death of 70 children from AKI linked to paracetamol syrups, which contained excessive levels of glycol and ethylene glycol. Officials at Indonesia's Food and Drug Agency said those products were not available locally, and the ingredients they were comprised of had now been banned from all child medicinal syrups sold in the country. We go over to Cuba, where the foreign ministry has thanked the U.S. for an offer made by the Biden administration that will provide $2 million for emergency relief efforts following Hurricane Ian. The communist government of Cuba made a rare request for aid from Washington in September after Hurricane Ian knocked out power to the entire island of 11 million people, killing 3 people, driving thousands from their homes. The United States will work with independent organizations to provide the aid. The U.S. Department has said in a statement. Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez posted on his social media, "We appreciate humanitarian assistance offer made by the U.S. This material contribution that is worth $2 million channeled through the International Federation of the Red Cross will add up to our recovery efforts in support of the victims of the ravages caused by #Hurricane Ian." From Cuba to Chad, where more than 1 million people are being impacted by floods in 18 out of 23 provinces. The United Nations says heavy rains that started early July have quickly overwhelmed drainage channels and ponds. The southern parts of the country is the hardest hit, but the flooding also struck some eastern provinces, such as in Silica, causing rivers to overflow. About 465,000 hectares of agricultural land have also been destroyed, causing fears of further aggravation to the already critical food insecurity situation in the country. The UN and its humanitarian partners in support of the government have delivered food, medicine, tents, mosquito nets, solar lamps and other items to about 200,000 people.
To Chad, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that more than 1 million men, women and children in Chad are now impacted by floods in 18 out of the country's 23 provinces. Heavy rain started in early July and have quickly overwhelmed drainage channels and ponds. The southern part of the country was hit the hardest, but the flooding also struck some eastern provinces, such as in Sila, causing rivers to overflow. In the capital, N'Djamena, several neighborhoods are entirely submerged, with people forced to flee their homes.
Meanwhile, the UN's Children's Fund, UNICEF, says hundreds of mothers and their children are destitute as severe drought continues to threaten death on a scale not seen in half a century in Somalia. At least 4 rainy seasons in the Horn of Africa region have failed, making this the worst drought in 40 years. The crisis has also been exacerbated by attacks by Al-Shabaab Islamist militants and high global food prices.
The United Nations Children's Agency says 1 child every minute is admitted to a health facility in Somalia to be treated for severe acute malnutrition. Spokesperson for UNICEF, James Elder, says the country is now at risk of child deaths on a scale not seen in decades. He told a briefing that the latest admission rates showed that 44,000 children were admitted to health facilities in August.
The latest admission rates from August in Somalia show 44,000 children admitted with severe acute malnutrition. Now, if we break down those numbers for the month, that is that today, every single minute of every single day, a child is being admitted to a health facility for the treatment of severe acute malnutrition. So it's 1 per minute. That's a child whose mother has walked for days to get her help, a child who's fighting to survive, a child whose life, of course, hangs in the balance.
Mr. Elder also adds that the situation already looks worse than in 2011, when famine killed more than 250,000 people in the country.
As we've said many times before, severely acutely malnourished children are 11 times more likely to die of diarrhea and measles and so on than well-nourished children. So with rates like those I've mentioned, Somalia really is on the brink of a tragedy at a scale not seen in decades.
In early September, the UN warned that 2 districts were projected to face famine between October and December, and that more than 500,000 of Somalia's children are at risk of dying from malnutrition.
Today, it's 4 failed rains. The 5th looks grim. The affected population is twice the size of 2011. Things are bad, and every sign indicates that they are going to get worse. So without greater action, without greater investment, we are facing the death of children on a scale not seen in half a century.
At the Banadir Hospital in the capital Mogadishu, doctors have been overwhelmed with the number of children admitted for malnutrition. Head pediatrician Awais Olad Hassan says the situation looks like the 2011 famine and worse than the 2017 drought. The Horn of Africa is suffering its worst drought in 40 years after the last 4 raining seasons failed. The 5th raining season is set to be looking grim. The situation in Somalia is also exacerbated by attacks from Al-Shabaab militants and high global food prices.
It must be a very difficult situation. That's how we end the program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Wonka. Bye for now.